Oh, we're going to what about evolution? You needed beneficial mutation, and natural selection selects this mutation over any existing genes other than detrimental mutations. That code for this function, the mutation, is inherited by an offspring. And this process must add new information. So to get from Lucy to us, you have to, besides having Dremel power tools, you have to have new information, okay? And what we find out is natural selection only works with existing information. It doesn't add anything. It adds errors. Remember we talked about this. It only adds errors. So when it adds errors, the errors have to be beneficial, and they're so infinitesimally rare to be beneficial that books are written about them, like sickle cell anemia is a mutation that's beneficial to some people but deadly to others. So mutation produces new, usually deleterious variants. But there's a lot of variation among humans. And if you just look at humans, that person on the left is 2 foot 6 inches high, and the person on the right is 7 feet. It's the same human. We're just humans. We're just lots of variations of humans. And there's a lot of variation, and natural selection works on, for instance, the Africans are dark because it's a very sunny climate, and that helps them physically. The Europeans are very fair-skinned because there's not much sun up there, and so that helps them, as an example. So the key to change is information, and according to Werner Gett, who's the director of the German Federal Institute of Physics, there's no known law, no process, and known sequence of events that can cause information to originate by itself in matter. Remember, we talked about this. Information is an example of intelligence.
Enough monkeys typing can create works of Shakespeare. Right?
Actually, what they really do is they eat the keys, they poop on the keyboards, right. they fight each other, and you get very little typing. I mean, they actually did that with 100 monkeys, and that's what happened. History of mistakes. Neanderthals are 100% human. Lucy and the Australopithecines are extinct chimpanzee-like creatures. There's deliberate misinformation. There's no mechanism for change. What we're looking at is a desperate attempt to censor information to protect evolution. Remember, it's the only science theory that has to be supported by legislation to be taught in school. So what is evolution? If evolution was true, we should see the fossil record. There's no intermediates. There's no mechanism we can think of. We are self-aware. No one has any explanation of why we're self-aware. We have an innate language ability. No one has any explanation for that. We have altruism in art. No one has any explanation for that. And we have an innate sense of right and wrong. Even atheists have it. And there's no explanation for that. These are all things that are different about humans than any other creature. We also have an idea of God, death, and the soul. Where did we get that? I mean, what is the evolutionary intermediate to that? There's absolutely nothing. So, were we a son of God, or are we children of God, or the children of ape? I say we're the children of God. We have 3 more classes. Next class will be Age of the Earth. That'll be 14. The 21st will be Origin of Life. We're going to skip the weekend of Thanksgiving, and the next week, the first weekend in December, it'll be Origin of the Universe. And then I think we're done. Any questions? Yeah, Scott.
How long ago were the Neanderthals?
A couple thousand years ago.
10,000?
4,400.
They're presented as a parallel track, at least in specials I watched. They're a parallel track. They didn't make it. We did. And
They're just a different variation. I mean, you remember most of the people who are talking to you are Europeans. Okay. And they consider Africans, Australian Aborigines, and probably the Chinese to be an inferior stock. So, but the interesting thing was, Neanderthals were actually probably, as far as intelligence goes, were probably smarter than we are. They lived longer than we did.
Some harsh conditions.
Harsh conditions. Not only that, but if you look at their skulls, there have been studies about how skulls form like this from around the jaw. So it grows in this direction the older you get. You know, when you're older, you have longer noses, longer chins. The ancient Greeks said that there were a group of people who were what they considered the ancients, and they called them the long noses. They have very long noses, and these were the ancient people. They were probably the descendants of Noah, like Shem, Arphaxad, those people who lived a long time. Shem lived 900 years. So he was alive from the ark up to Abraham. So Abraham, when he saw the king of Salem, right, the priest, most people believe that was Shem. Because Shem had knowledge of the true God. Preserved it in his lifetime over all those generations. You know, Melchizedek, probably Shem. And where we get the Shemites.
Why do you think they were able to live 1,000 years?
Because their daddy did. And they came into a new world where there's lots of radiation and detrimental problems, and the genome started to degrade because of all these new environmental problems. Remember, before it was perfectly suited world, even though people were evil, then it was the flood, and then what was left was a devastated world. What we see today as beauty, there's really beauty in devastation. Because the pre-flood world was nothing like this. There was more vegetation. It was warm from the pole to pole.
There was oxygen everywhere. The
Yeah.
Earth itself was smaller.
And when they do studies of the oxygen in rocks, they find out way down low, there was a lot more oxygen than there is now.
I guess that's what I'm missing is a lot of us here are working through 20, 30, 40 years of reading who we felt were very learned, very knowledgeable people who wrote textbooks, that wrote History of Texas, The Source, Michener. I mean, all these things where stories are told of how to hook all this together, and so our brains are steeped in, well, this is how things came to be. So I guess
It took me 5 years to get through this.
Right. So then we're looking for sort of the same scientific textbooks that, because a lot of what I've been reading so far is more these are all the problems with the argument, and that's what I see on specials that usually play against this is, well, they're just complaining about these gaps, but we'll eventually fill them in, and we will have
Yeah,
a
what
better
they call
story.
that is creationists have a god of the gaps.
Right, and we'll
Right?
fill it in, and then
And
they
what
won't have
the
God.
creationists would say is that the evolutionists have evolution of the gaps.
Yeah. Mhm.
Because there are these huge gaps that they can't fill in either.
Right. But we're looking for, I guess, the same sort of Michener tale of beginning to end. I mean, we got the Bible, but something that fills in the scientific pieces to match the Bible that then gives me a sense of how did this form. Like you mentioned the oxygen, I hadn't heard that before. I thought the way the straw man was put up that all Christian or creationists believe that animals were made the way they were and there was no natural selection. But then as I read these books, they're like, no, natural selection
It's
is okay
built
with
in.
creation. So now it's me sort of trying to discern all the different creationists' view on creation to get sort of is there a overall creationist story?
Did you read the Yellow Book?
I've been reading it. I've got about
There's
3
a lot
chapters.
of that in there.
Okay.
There's a lot of that in there, hanging it together.
Yeah. Well, they end up presenting, well, there's 5 or 6 different things about how the origin of the universe happened. I mean, in the end, there's a lot of science that still needs to be filled in. So, and I guess there's no way to tell.
And why is that? Because it's the unobserved and unobservable
Right.
past. And everything we talk about the unobserved and the unobservable past is really all about this is what we're talking
Right.
about. And
Yeah.
what you're talking
Where
about.
do you fit all these facts into?
Right.
Yeah.
Here's the framework. What's the framework?
Right.
You
What's
have
the
to
framework?
change your whole way of thinking. I mean, that's
Because
what
what
I
they've done
have
is
to
they
do.
built a framework to hang the facts on, like a
There's
Christmas tree.
absolutely,
Okay?
It's a framework we've all gone through
You've
since
been
we were
indoctrinated
kids.
in
All
that
wrong.
I
framework.
love Nova. I loved Scientific American. I love going to the Smithsonian.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now, as I go with my kids, I'm like, how much of this can I even still enjoy? Do I have to give up on science? Is there still
No,
a
you
little
don't
bit of
give up on
science?
science,
Is
you
there
give up on the explanations.
right? I can't read any of the stuff underneath
Wait a minute.
all of these wonderful pictures because they all give weird explanations that I can't totally know the
There are
truth.
two sciences, right?
Yeah.
There's experimental science, operations science, right?
Mhm.
Observable science in the here and now. And then there's forensic science.
Right.
And all of evolution is forensics. Actually, it's storytelling. It's not even forensics, because forensics, if you put this into the CSI crime lab, those things about the apes and things that we saw, you would say that's not science at all, that's just doctoring the evidence.
Right.
Because they want that story to be true, just like I want this story to be true.